we were
then the environment was cleaned up.
First time I was hearing about this stuff. Wow. It was totally new to me.
With social impact consulting.
Was a year of consciousness. So with that consciousness, we are going to see more action, more civic activism.
If you look at the rights and freedom of citizens to express themselves freely, that is deteriorating.
One of the major threats to the civic space in 2022 remains government, repressive governments and governmental action.
Advocacy is for a purpose, to influence social change in the positive direction.
Good afternoon, everyone. How you doing today? Welcome to another great episode of the Development Sector Series, which is Devsectorseries. So I'm just excited to see you all here. I see a couple of people from YouTube. I see Bilkisu Musa saying good morning. Well, it's afternoon here on this neck of the woods, so good morning, afternoon to you too. And then I have Obieze Chukwuemeka. Good morning. I am patiently waiting. Thank you so much for being here with us. Okay, so I'm so excited about this great episode of the Development Sector Series. Now, what you were watching earlier is some documentaries that we have coming up called Untold Impact. Untold Impact initially started off as a 5-episode documentary series. Now it is a 7-episode documentary series on the role of civil society in development, especially now that we're heading towards the elections. We need to now realize the critical role of civil society in the grand scheme of things. Okay, and the next one is on the outlook in 2022 of the civic space. As we all know, the civic space is shrinking. How do we then handle being able to speak freely associate, to freely express ourselves as citizens of our great nation? So, my own way of advocacy is through storytelling, is through communication, is through content creation. That's my way of conducting advocacy. So again, it's coming up. These documentaries are coming up pretty soon. So stay tuned. We're really trying to bring some good content out for you to really showcase the development sector, what the development sector is doing in the area of education, which we had last week. The co-founder of Teach for Nigeria, Nike Akirele de Souza, she talked about human capital in Nigeria, and now we're continuing the trend of education, talking about the myth of inclusive education in Nigeria. So that is my way of advocacy, is storytelling, and is through having really serious conversations with development experts, with development practitioners of which I am honored to have a really, really special guest with us today. So now, you guys, do me a quick solid. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. If you're on Facebook, make sure you share this live broadcast. If you're on LinkedIn, make sure you share. On YouTube, make sure you just like, subscribe, click on the bell notification so that you can be notified when we go live week after week, okay? So now I'm gonna get you right to our guest, Mr. Ben Arikpo, okay? I met him as, you know, as they call him the grandfather of organizational development in Nigeria. I mean, he was talking about organizational development before it was even thought of. So he was talking about it, and then we now began to have a deeper conversation. And then he now talked about being the chairman of the Dyslexia Foundation. It's very few people you see that are thriving and are experts in the interest that they've shown. He's an organizational development specialist, and he is the best at what he does. And he is the chairman. He and his wife started the Dyslexia Foundation, and he is an expert in that area. I mean, it takes someone that is really gifted and passionate to be able to, because I mean, it's a lot of work being an expert in one area, not to talk of a multiple area experts. So I'm just so excited and thrilled, because experts tend to break things down for you that even your 9, 8, 7-year-old can understand. So I'm thrilled to have this special guest. So guess what? Stay tuned, keep watching, like, subscribe, share, and then I'm going to share the video bio of Mr. Ben Arikpo, who is the chairman and co-founder of the Dyslexia Foundation. Stay tuned. See you soon. Is a sociologist, applied psychologist, social worker, and special needs practitioner with over 30 years of experience in the field. He is the chairman of the board of trustees of the Dyslexia Foundation Nigeria, which he co-founded with his wife in response to their struggle with helping their child overcome dyslexia, ADHD, and cognitive skills weaknesses. He is also the Director of Operations and Quality Control of the Brain Training and Development Center, LearningRx Nigeria, a cognitive skills development franchise from the United States. He is also the founder and CEO of Arikpo Consults, that specializes in providing result-oriented organization and business development consultancy services, entrepreneurship capacity building, training and facilitation to support organizations, public and private, in their change and development processes. In their over 10 years of experience, they have supported various private and public sector bi- and multilateral agencies such as FCDO, USAID, the World Bank, and their sponsored projects. Ben is passionate about special needs education, including creating awareness for dyslexia in Nigeria, because of his conviction that if he hadn't found out what was wrong with his son, he might have given up. Allow me to introduce to some and present to others Mr. Ben Arikpo, co-founder and chairman of the Dyslexia Foundation Nigeria.
Oh, wow.
Hello, good afternoon, Mr. Arikpo. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Efua. Thank you. Welcome. I'm so glad I'm here, and thanks for that wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. I guess we can have some details.
Yeah, I'm so excited. And again, I just want to talk to the audience. Mr. Arikpo, Mr. Ben Arikpo is an expert in I would say different learning abilities, okay, and inclusivity. He is an expert in that area. So if you're listening and you have any questions whatsoever, please make sure you put it in the comment section. We will be happy to address any questions or comments that you might have, okay? So please, if you're on Facebook, if you're on LinkedIn, if you're on YouTube, make sure you just hit the comments if you have any questions during our broadcast, okay? So keep your ears down. We're getting ready to get started, okay? All right, so let me just start with our first question here. So as a seasoned consultant, what made you start the Dyslexia Foundation?
Thank you very much, F1, and thank you, the audience, for listening. I like the phrase, what made you start? Now, in 2011, my wife and I, of course, as is often, women are the first to find out that the children are struggling with learning in school. Of course, my wife was telling me about my son struggling, and I would say, never mind, he will catch up. I believed that he would catch up. He was going to catch up. Unfortunately, and as God will arrange things, she had to travel and then left me to care for his revision. Again, as God will arrange things, his lesson teacher was away. So I had the onerous task of helping with revision to go back to school to write his exam the subsequent week, the following week. Unfortunately, I realized at that day that he couldn't read the work he brought from school. And so I was disappointed, of course, as most parents would be. I went in anger the next Monday to the school to actually start harassing them and blaming them for what he's not learning or learning. And it was there they told me, oh, yes, you know your son is a slow learner, he's this and that. They gave me a dossier that even made me leave the school premises in shame rather than anything else. But I was determined to seek a solution for him at that point. And that's when I started looking for solutions. I went from one school to the other, as most parents are doing today, changing from one school to the other, getting one lesson teacher after the other. Of course, whenever the child isn't doing well, then it is the school that is blamed or the lesson teacher is blamed. At that point, I was in that trap. I was in that circle. I wasn't aware at the point that there was something that was making him struggle, because his siblings are very smart, very, very smart. So I didn't expect him to do any less. So, but on that particular point, we're going from school to school and from lesson teacher to lesson teacher, and then the frustration was mounting and increasing. It was after the frustration has been increased to the point where I couldn't take it anymore because nothing seemed to be working for him, despite my changing schools for him. Then I took him to the United States to see what was wrong. It was at that point we came across what was called the brain training program. And I'm happy you brought that first sign. The first sign you saw me receiving, that was a license for the whole of Nigeria in 2013 from Dr. Ken Gibson himself, who founded the brain training program. So we came back with the brain training program, went to train ourselves. After we trained, my wife and I trained, and we started to train our son. To the glory of God, in 5 months to 6 months, we started seeing improvements in his cognitive skills, because the brain training program focuses essentially on the cognitive skill. And let me say this, behind every learning struggle, there is a cognitive skill deficiency. If you don't fix the cognitive skill deficiency, then you are going to go round and round like I've been doing without a success story. Yes, people have said, oh, my child went to a reading class and then he was able to read. But you see, the problem with that is that it improves for a very short time. It's not sustainable. And now we're talking about sustainable interventions that would make. So my son began to improve, and to the glory of God, as we speak, he's in university, just finished his 100 level at the age of 19. You think that's not a success? I think it's a great success. So how did we then found a foundation? In 2015, we started the brain training program in 2013, and we're all the time talking about brain training. In 2015, we trained a young person who was actually preparing to travel to Canada. At the end of his training, which has helped him very much, we asked him, would you tell your friends about us? He said, no. And we said, why? We're surprised. Why? He said, because brain training was for mad people. Only mad people went to learning support, people whose brains are not correct. And of course, then we looked at it. We have a small team of researchers and said, oh, if you look at your native language, just think back to your native language. Anything that has to do with cognition and brain is so closely related to psychiatry that even dyslexia sometimes gets stigmatized as a psychiatric issue. whereas it is not. So because of that, the boy said he will not tell his friends about us. Then I asked him the question, or we asked him, would you tell your friends about something that helped you read, write, spell, and comprehend? He said, of course. And that's when we now created the foundation. Because dyslexia is a learning challenge, a learning condition that makes people struggle with reading, writing, spelling, and comprehension. And in 2015, when the foundation was started, there was very little awareness about dyslexia in Nigeria. And so many people haven't heard about it, while the awareness is still low, but at least it's better than 2015. So we started now the campaign of at least telling people about dyslexia, setting up the foundation, going on massive awareness. Our 50% of our work is on awareness, on radio, on channels like this, on newspapers, on television. We keep doing awareness because we want the mass parents to hear about dyslexia so that they stop abusing, beating, stigmatizing children for what is not their problem. The problem with people who are struggling to read, write, spell, and comprehend is essentially their learning struggle, which is rooted in their cognition, which is a brain condition that can be fixed. So that's how we started up with the Dyslexia Foundation. And my wife and I founded it, appointed some people. We have a very vibrant board of people. We have a board, we have a management team, and we've been going on for the last, since 2015. And so we'll be celebrating our 5th year anniversary. I mean, 2015 to 2023, we should be celebrating in April next year. We should be on our anniversary. The brain training program itself would have been 10 years in Nigeria by March of 2023. So we have a double celebration coming up next year. Watch out for
Wow. Congratulations for that. And again, well done. Well done. So you already alluded to, you already started answering this question. So it's just to kind of get into a bit more detail. How do you identify children and adults with different learning styles, different learning abilities?
Thank you so much. And let me go back to the fundamental. Let me start with the children, for instance. Because if a child suffers dyslexia or any learning disability or learning challenge, which is not managed during that period, it's carried over to adulthood. And that's the sad part. Because then people get to adulthood and suddenly realize that I have lived with this condition. Why didn't I know about it? Why didn't we do something about it? Why did my parents not do something about it? But let's start with children. What's the first thing you see in a child who is going to have a learning difference? The first thing is slow developmental stages. There are certain developmental stages that God in His infinite wisdom has put in us humans to mark our growth. What is the first one? Sitting, crawling, standing, walking, and then speech. Any child who is going to have difficulties in learning at any stage of their life will start showing delays in those developmental stages right from beginning. And this could have been traced to one of several factors. It could be one, genetic, inherited, because these conditions are inherited from generation to generation. Or it could be a traumatic brain injury while the child was still in the womb. How does this happen? If there was prolonged delivery, prolonged labor as we call it, and the child is too long in labor, and I say this as a general rule, any labor that is more than 2 hours, please elect for surgery. Because what you tend to do is that you will cause the child to be stressed. And by the time the child is born, there might be a condition called aphasia. Aphasia is a medical condition that is the result of the deprivation of oxygen to the brain. When that happens, that little second, minutes that the brain was deprived of oxygen, there could be a traumatic brain injury. And that could be at that point that is responsible for reading, writing, spelling, and comprehension, or any other learning challenge. So that's how you identify them. Now, the other way to identify after the child, assuming now that you have seen certain signs, your child is struggling to read, struggling to write, struggling to comprehend, and has a bit of attention. How do you identify that? You take them for a professional assessment. This is one thing. Don't just go on the internet and say, oh, I saw that they say if the child cannot say, if the child is switching their letters, B for D, D for B, then that means the child has dyslexia. No. There are over 60 signs and symptoms of dyslexia. And only a professional assessment can get you a right assessment. Now, dyslexia is so closely related with other conditions, such as dyscalculia, which is a calculation thing, or dysgraphia, or dyspraxia, or any other Asperger syndrome. They are so close. Autism, Down syndrome, they are so close in terms of their signs and symptoms that only a professional assessment can actually tell you. And that professional assessment does not need to be done anymore abroad. It can be done here in Nigeria. There are centers in Nigeria, both by the Dyslexia Foundation and others, where you can carry out a diagnosis of a child that is struggling with any of those learning challenges. The challenge is that when people have diagnosed, then sometimes they are unable to manage the journey of intervention. Because after you have diagnosed, it's like going to the hospital and the doctor says, oh, sorry, you have malaria. So what? I need to be treated for the malaria. So the intervention is the second part. So identifying the problem and then intervening through brain exercises. I can always put up my hand on my chest and say, without cognitive enhancement, cognitive abilities training, it is absolutely difficult, if not impossible, to overcome these learning challenges in a child or any adult. And we have children and adults in all of our centers who are currently going through the cognitive skill enhancement program. Why? Because the fundamental principle upon which we work is that the brain can be rewired, and it can be rewired through exercises. So 2 steps: identify the challenge through an assessment, a professional assessment, train the child, and then assess again to see the benefits that the person has made in the short time of the training.
Thank you so much for that. That gives us a lot of clarity on different children and adults, and you've just educated expectant mothers as well, that if a labor is longer than 2 or 3 hours, just elect for surgery so that you can avoid any stress on the child that may result in some cognitive challenges as they're growing up. And the insight is incredible. Thank you so much for that, sir. So our next question is, now we're going macro. So what is your definition of inclusive education in Nigeria?
Good. And this is where my conversation starts with looking at the myth in terms of understanding. My definition, because that's what you're asking me, what's my definition of inclusive education in Nigeria? Inclusive education, unlike the one that UNICEF and other educationists are asking, is an education that is tailored to every child in the education system. Please mark my words, every child. It doesn't say children with learning disabilities. It doesn't say education suitable for people with cognitive weaknesses. Now, my worry after these years of being involved in this field is that I see a gap in the way we address inclusive education. Inclusive education has been tailored and has been designed so far to mean children that are struggling, children with learning challenges, children with disabilities. And when we say inclusive, we're saying, okay, once you bring them into the education system, let's assume, and as we say, inclusive classrooms, then we have solved the problem of inclusion. And I say that's a myth. That's where the myth starts. An inclusive classroom does not necessarily translate to an inclusive education. I'll repeat. An inclusive classroom does not necessarily translate to an inclusive learning that results in inclusive education. The purpose of learning, the purpose of education is learning. And the purpose of learning is behavior change, attitude change, and growth and development. So when you have an inclusive classroom where the curriculum for the children is still a singular curriculum, irrespective of the learning difference of the child, then that education is not inclusive. I give you an instance.
I see.
I give you an instance. A child with attention deficit disorder or with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, by nature, his brain or the brain of that child requires a lot of movement in the space of time. Now, in inclusive education, the teacher comes into the class gets up and says, "Good morning, Mr. Ben Arikpo. How are you? Good morning. Sit down." They sit down. Now, 5 minutes into the class, the child with an attention deficiency disorder, his body is wanting to move because he learns best by moving from place to place. But anytime he tries to move, it just says, "Sit down." So in that situation, the teacher is inhibiting the child from learning because the teacher's curriculum gives him time to impart knowledge to a particular child in a particular style, irrespective of what this particular child learning needs are. And I've asked several teachers when I'm training teachers, I've asked them, is there anything that says the child cannot stand while learning? And they say no, but sometimes they get disrupted. But that's the nature of their challenge. So it is for you, the teacher, to design the curriculum and the class activities to ensure that you meet the one that requires to move. Okay, in the end, what do they get children doing? "Excuse me, sir, I want to go to the washroom. Excuse me, I want to go to..." They're not going to the washroom. That's just their defense.
They just need to move.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They just need to move because you deprive them of that movement, which their body requires, their brain requires it, and so they have to find, we call it ingenious ways of surviving the class. And in that process of going out, they have missed out on the learning that takes place at that point in time. So in an inclusive classroom would be a classroom in which the teacher, first and foremost, is preparing the notes of lessons, conscious of the fact that there are different ways of learning in the class. There are some people who are kinetic, there are some people who are visual, there are some people who are abstract or physical. So the teacher, first and foremost, needs to take all that into consideration in designing the notes of lessons to impact the learning into the child. Now, again, I've used that consciously and professionally. When you teach, the goal is that the person is able to learn something from you, and that learning then results in a behavioral change. But if at the end of the class, the child or the person is unable to learn, one of the evidence is that it does not translate to behavior change, and therefore it does not translate to grades in class. That's why we set examinations.
Okay, so I think you're going into the next question. So let me just highlight the next, because you're just transitioning into that question right now. Like, how can the Nigerian education system accommodate the different learning styles? So you're already going into it in terms of how based on curriculum, as you're training teachers based on curriculum. So you can also expand on what you were saying, sir.
All right. The Nigerian education system now seems to be one size fits all in terms of the curriculum.
Yes, sir.
And it's marked by grade. So a child is in grade 1 is expected to learn this. Everyone. Okay? So if we have to do something about Nigerian educational system to correct this, we have to go step back to start with teacher training. Our teacher training in educational colleges or wherever they are, and we've been making this advocacy to NTI and other institutions of training teachers. We're saying we can use one curriculum to meet every need of the struggling child. Beyond the struggling child, there are other children who are gifted in the class. There are other children who are average in the class. But the curriculum is one curriculum for everyone. So when a teacher is in a classroom As long as the gifted child says, "I, sir, I understand the answer," and he checks the second child says the same, the teacher moves on. And yet there are so many children that are average and below average, that are struggling with learning at that pace and at that time, to the extent that they are always left behind. This is where our campaign for this year and next year is "No one truly left behind," because we are focusing on trying to accommodate the gifted children who need to be supported to excel. The sky is the beginning of their life or their growth. And then we want to take the average children to become excellent. And then the struggling child. So in education, Nigerian education system focuses so much on the gifted and the average, and then there is the neglect, total neglect of very little attention because of the absence of appropriate preparation of the teachers to handle the learning styles and learning differences in the different children and people they meet. We recently had a case of the university. A university student has been placed on probation because he didn't pass certain courses, and now he's being given one semester, summer semester to remedy it. Otherwise, they will send him out of the university. And I asked the university authorities when we were meeting with student affairs, I said to them, have you checked the law that says a university course is between 4 and 6 years? A child can complete his course or her course between 4 and 6 years. Not every child who was on a 4-year course should do a 4-year course. There should be a moderation of their curriculum, reducing their workload to ensure that they complete it within a 6-year period that's allowed by the university law, and they still get the same class of degree that they ought to get. Not because they spent an extra 2 years, therefore they are grieving the third class or a past degree because they spent extra years. No, their workload is reduced to the point where they are able to mix it and to excel without necessarily suffering the. So the problem sometimes is actually, while we're talking of this, the problem sometimes is with the teachers. Sorry, not just with the teachers, but with the parents. Parents are shy to say, my child has dyslexia. And then, of course, when you tell them that, they say, it's not my portion, God forbid. And I don't know whose portion it is.
You know,
it was my portion. I did something about it, and today I'm curious for it. So please accept your portion.
I think a typical example of that, even an influencer here in Nigeria, Aisha Yusufu, her son just graduated from college, and she proudly said, my son is dyslexic. They told us he will never graduate from college, but she was like, thank God, I've been able to graduate my son from college. And I actually shared this link with her that we'll be having conversations about the myth of inclusive education in Nigeria, because if there are more parents like that say, this is the challenge I faced as a parent, and this is how we overcame it, I think it will be even more culturally acceptable for a parent to say, these are the challenges with my child, and how can we work together to overcome it? So anybody here in the audience, if anything that we're discussing sounds familiar to you and in your home and with your child, and you have any questions, just put it in the comment section. We'll be happy to then answer some of these questions as well. Now, I wanted to even go a bit more macro as well, especially now that we're changing administrations. In 2023, we're going to go to the polling booths. We're going to elect a president, and soon enough we'll be electing people in the National Assembly and all that. So we'll be going into the 10th Assembly. What are some of the policies that we should expect from them with regards to inclusive education and accommodating different learning abilities? In fact, when I was talking to people in the disability community and a lot of the activists and advocates, they said that President Buhari is the most disability-friendly president that they've had in years. So maybe this is alluding to physical disabilities, but in terms of learning challenges and education, what do you think our expectations should be, or what should we challenge the new administration to do so that we can further enhance human capital in Nigeria in terms of making sure it's more inclusive of everyone?
Thank you so much. I think they can say that he's the most friendly because he passed the Disability Act. They lost the law now. At least you can't discriminate. But take a look at to what extent are the provisions of the Act implemented. Go to schools. Let's start with, since we are talking education, go to schools and see how many schools have ramps, even for people on wheelchairs. Take a look at how many schools have learning support centers and inclusive classrooms. So in terms of, it's not just about the law, it's about actually them making
The implementation.
Policies. You know, the law has to be translated to a policy, and then the policy has to be implemented. Implementation is key. Now, to go back to the, what are we thinking for the new administration, for instance, assuming there's an administration that comes into place in 2023, I would say, let's go back to, I looked at the Strategic Plan for Education 2020 to 2025, and the provisions are great. However, it misses out one major component, which is that teacher training. I keep saying teacher training because it is the teachers who are the first line of education for our children. And then if they don't know, I mean, you don't give what you don't know. You can't say, you can't do what you don't know. If they don't know enough on these issues, then they can't teach it. So let's go back in revising the teacher training curriculum. Let's put in a very reasonable section on actually preparing our teachers for inclusive education, teachers in special needs education, to focus more about cognitive skills, abilities. If I had the resources, or I can say, if there's one thing I want the next president of Nigeria to do for me as a person and as a community, I would say every child 5 years and above entering public school or private school should have a cognitive assessment as a compulsory requirement, because that would enable you to know exactly what the differences, what the learning differences of this child are as early as that. And then you can tailor their education in line with their cognitive. At the moment, as I said earlier, it's one size fits all. And so that misses the major map. The second thing is about the funding of education. Of course, we are still behind the United Nations requirement for 26% of education, not to talk about the current ASU strike, not to talk about the mass exodus of people schooling abroad and leaving the educational systems here. So to look into facilities, I listened to one commentary by one of the members of the National Assembly. He said, and I want to support him on that, if all public officials are meant to send their children to public schools, then the public schools will go better. Not to say that we are asking this to happen so that we destroy the private sector education. No. Private sector education should be supplemental, should be supplementary to public school education, as it used to be, so that the public school is the first choice. All of us, I am a product of a public school. Primary school, secondary school was public. So university was a public university, and I'm still here, knowledgeable as I am, being trained, Nigerian trained. So please, the new administration should look inwards by developing education at all levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary. And of course, pay great emphasis on teacher training and special needs. No one special needs education approach can respond to all the special needs in a school system. So that's why I'm advocating for an inclusive and multi-sectoral approach to special needs, so that when you have a behavioral psychologist, an educational psychologist, a language therapist, or speech and language therapist, a visual therapist, so you have that in a school so that they are able to meet the needs of all of them. And these people are available. This expertise is available. Many of them are unemployed. Many of them, I can bet you they're unemployed. So a government that is coming in 2023 must look inwards, develop the talent pool of the people who are providing the services, and ensure that at every level there is cognitive skill assessments before people access education at that level.
This is a very interesting insight, sir, in terms of what looking at education from a holistic lens, with regards to making sure that there's more money in the budget for education, making sure that there's more inclusivity, and then really breaking down special needs education and teacher training. So and then also making sure that the public education is the primary place for education, and the private education should be supplementary. These are some really good insights on what we should be holding our officials accountable on. And first of all, making sure that these laws have policies that can be implemented. So it's not just to have a law, but the implementation is where the challenges is. So I'm going to bring this conversation back home, okay, to what parents should do, because there are a lot of parents that maybe see some of these challenges and may be having challenges like, to do the assessment is expensive. Even to do an assessment like what you're talking about in the United States, you can go into the thousands of dollars. You get what I'm saying? And even with the Dyslexia Foundation, in terms of what you're charging already, it's very subsidized. But as you can see in this our society, there are a lot of people that can't even the subsidized amount, they can't even afford it. So what do you think on a foundational level, maybe a receptionist that has a son that's having some challenges, a driver that's having a daughter that sees some of these things, how do parents like that in their own capacity, how can they accommodate their own children with different learning abilities? What do you think they can do?
First, thank you for that question. First, let's kill the culture of denial.
Yeah.
If parents can kill that culture of denial, too many parents are still in denial, saying, there's nothing wrong with my child. And that's where the problem starts. As the person thinks it, so he is. So when you say there's nothing wrong with your child, then you're not going to do anything. A man brought a 7-year-old child to me once, and I said, what have you done so far? He said, we've been praying. We've been going from prayer house to the next prayer house, and then, of course, we've also gone to native doctors, all of them. I said, have you been to a hospital? The first thing they needed to do was speech therapy. At 7, the boy was not speaking. I said, have you been to the hospital for speech therapy? He said, no, I'm not going to hospital. So they leave what they should have done first, last. So the first thing for parents is to first take the child. Once you begin to notice your child is unable to sit well, crawl, stand, walk, speak, before they get to 2, every child should start to speak before they get years old. If they're not able to speak at that point, then you know that there's a problem. Start seeking help.
I see.
Don't wait for too long. Help in terms of taking them to speech therapy, taking them to hospital. Let the pediatric, the volunteer pediatric doctors who are there, who can say, no, this child is not meeting their needs. This is where to go. This is the next step to do. So first seek help. Many parents are not seeking that help until it is too late. I mean, the brain can be rewired, and it can be rewired with exercises. However, it takes 2 years, mark my words, 2 years to rewire a brain when the child is between 6 and 16. When a child is between 16 years, it takes 2 years to rewire the brain and bring the cognitive skills again. Now, but after 16, it takes 3 to 5 years. And we see people who are 30, 50, or 40 coming. At that point, when you say, look, it's going to take 3 to 5 years to do this same, they say, it's too long. So first, parents must accept responsibility and take action that something is wrong with their children before they start seeking action, seeking help. Help is available in Nigeria now. Google it, search for it. Once you have seen it, then confirm. Now, in terms of what can parents do, the other thing I see parents can do, and I say this from experience, I see so many parents who come to us with their children that are struggling, and these are parents who have abandoned their responsibility for child support and parenting to house helps and domestic servants, whose own educational levels are lower than yours. So what does the child get when you have left the child with the nanny or the domestic help? The domestic help finishes cleaning and sits down and watches African Magic, Z-Wall, and all of those things. And so there is no cognitive exercise happening even at that developmental stage for the child. And the parents come back so late in the quest for seeking for money, so to speak. They forget that the money they seek will be used to take care of the children. So please, parents, spend time with your children. If you can, spend between 30 minutes to 1 hour daily just going through your children's work, just having conversation with them. Okay, you come back and they say, Daddy, welcome. Okay, how are you? How was your day? Fine. And you are happy with that? No, that shouldn't be it. Ask the next question. What was fine about the day? That generates a conversation. Then you can see where the problem is, either in school or anywhere else. Develop a relationship with your children. Have communication at home. Let there be joint thinking and joint planning at home with the children. And then if you establish that they really have a problem, even if you can't do anything else, come to us at the Dyslexia Foundation and you're ready to sit at home to do some work. We'll give you materials that you can sit at home on your own and be taking the children through it. These are things you can do on your own. But you must first make the sacrifice of giving time. And then, of course, you must learn that because you're not a professional, sometimes when you have told them, this is D-H-E-D, and they see the next line and they don't get it, you don't lose your temper and say, but I just told you this thing. And you give them a knock on that. Or you start that. That's not, you need an empathic mind to know that the reason they're not seeing that word you just told them is because their memory is faulty. And that's where the brain training and cognitive abilities exercises come in. Without repairing the brain, without cognitive abilities improvement, it is pretty difficult. And I say that, if not impossible, to get these people to learn. But when you rewire them, those things we're struggling with before they begin to do, and even splinter skills begin to improve, and then you can say, like me, you can say, yes, I'm a proud parent of a child who had dyslexia and had worked through it. So parents, please, take responsibility for your action, accept that something is wrong with the child, seek help, get the help you need, and invest time in taking your child through. Those initial stages might require your investment of time and a little bit of your time as a family.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. If you have any questions and comments for Mr. Ben Arikpo, please, this is the time for you to highlight them. So I'm very, very excited about this conversation. I'm looking at this comment. This is from Obieze Chukwuemeka. It says, my mentor, Mr. Ben Arikpo, is killing the show. I'm really getting enlightened from the information about dyslexia and inclusive education. And here is a comment from Mrs. Ibodage Ahabwe. She says, issues like this coming into limelight in Nigeria. Our educational system have no provisions beyond the normal add and subtract education. And then she further mentioned that special needs students must be adequately provided for in an all-inclusive educational system. I'm not expecting any drastic change soon with the ASU strike and the federal government's attitude to our need. So those are the comments that we've gotten so far. So if you have any questions and comments, please make sure you highlight that in the comment section, and I'll be glad. But sometimes, Mr. Ben, there is usually a bit of a delay in the comments in the streaming service. So sometimes I'm not able to say those till after the conversation. But again, thank you so much. This has been a very enlightening conversation. So can you just provide your final thoughts?
Yeah, I like the final thought. My final thoughts are many. If I have all the resources at the moment, I talked about the myth of inclusive education. And one of the things the foundation is doing right now is to ensure or to ensure that we partner with schools who are the frontliners for providing these services. Here, I'm not talking of public schools. Of course, we all know how difficult it is to gain entry into the government circles to work with them for private public school education. But I'm talking of private schools now. If you are interested in actually setting up a learning support center in your school, in the school that you founded or you're working in, or you're a special needs education practitioner, you're interested in setting up an inclusive center to provide support for people with learning challenges, please do get in touch with us. The contacts are all there. I think you can see, or you can send, I'm sure that the producer will do some magic and produce maybe email or something that we can send to. But the truth of the matter is that let's set up frontline centers right in the school so that we can identify. The schools do identify them. Teachers know them. And they do inform parents, but parents say, look, don't label my child. It's not about labeling. That's why I talked about taking responsibility. If your child is struggling, the child is struggling. Stop this denial, because you can continue for denial until the child after 16, it takes longer. Early intervention is key to remediation of learning challenges. Early intervention. The earlier you intervene, the better and the easier it is for the child or the person to get out of that situation. It's not a death sentence. My son started struggling when he was 9, or I noticed he started struggling when he was 9. So for 10 years, you can imagine I've worked with him. He's 19 now. He finished his school start at 18. You think that's late? For me, that's not late. I tell you. I tell you, at 18 is not late. And at 19, he had just finished 100 level at university. He's not a late starter, as the school would let me believe.
At all, compared to the world age bracket, it's not at all.
At all, it's not. So please, first, stop comparing your child. Stop just pushing your child to get on the next class. The education is cumulative. If you miss out on any level or any curriculum that the child was supposed to learn and didn't learn because you moved the child too quickly, then the child will pay for it later on. I know of a friend of mine whose daughter went into secondary school at the age of 9 and went to university at the age of 15. Second year, she said, I'm not going to school again. I'm fed up. Education is a scam. As you know, this scam thing they talk about every time now. Adulthood is a scam, education is a scam, everything now, Nigeria is a scam, everything. But I tell you, that was because she was pushed too fast. There's a maturation period, there's a maturity that goes with particular things. That's why the curriculum was designed in the way it was designed. Now, parents, children are in primary 4, they want them to sit for common entrance in primary 4.
Exactly.
So they get into secondary school before they are 9 or 8. And then, oh, my child is 8 and is in JS1. Don't worry. If you're not careful, I'm not saying it applies for everybody, but if you're not careful, you're most likely to find that the child at that point in time might have that bubble burst, and then you begin to wonder what went wrong. What went wrong was that you didn't allow the maturation period of learning to take place. One of the myths of inclusive education and inclusive is that inclusive classrooms mean inclusive learning. No, it doesn't. Inclusive classrooms is such that the teacher in the class is able to take cognizance of all the learning needs of every child in that class and be able to provide appropriate interventions that are suitable for every learner. A kinetic learner, a visual learner, an intellectual learner, they don't all learn the same way. So if you're a teacher, please begin to think about how can I vary my notes of lessons to meet the needs of the children in my inclusive class. Can we truly make the SDG goal achievable by ensuring truly no one is left behind in such a way that both the gifted, the average, and the struggling child is helped to achieve their potential. Each one has a potential that God has put into them. Let's help them discover it, that they can fly. Thank you. I hope you have learned a couple of things in this episode that I'll look forward to continuing the conversation online with you.
Of course. I just saw a quick question from Xavier Ekwe from LinkedIn. He said, what can private schools do to help accommodate children with learning difficulties? I know you had answered that question, but I know he had just asked it, so maybe he came in later in the conversation.
Yeah. I think that basically set up a learning support center. There's absolutely nothing wrong with having a learning support center. There's absolutely nothing wrong with having an inclusive classroom. But then you must be ready consciously. It's a conscious effort. You must be intentional about it. You must be strategic. You must make that decision that no child is truly left behind. So we are offering the opportunity to partner to set up those learning support centers that can actually truly be inclusive in a way. So if you're a school owner and you really want to do what I'm saying now, or you listen to this, or you are a parent of a child in a school that hasn't yet had a learning support center, please get in touch with us and we will be able to take you through the process and have that your child's school or your school have a learning support center. Everyone deserves to learn and everyone deserves to learn in an inclusive way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ben Arikpo. Thank you so much for this session. Again, this was such an awesome conversation. Just remember that this is not going to be our last conversation on Devsectorseries. We still have a lot more to share based on your extensive expertise, not only in the educational sector, but in other sectors that are in the development space. Again, thank you so much for your contribution to this episode.
Thank you so much, Annie. Nice meeting.
All right, take care. All right, you guys, thank you so much for watching this wonderful episode with Mr. Ben Arikpo, who is the chairman of the Dyslexia Foundation, talking about the myth of inclusive education in Nigeria. He really talked vividly on just having inclusion in the classrooms, teacher training, special education centers, and then also seeing that the government adds more money into education and making public education the first option in education, because during his time he was a recipient of public education from primary all the way to tertiary institutions, and that education needs to accommodate different learning abilities. Again, this was such a great and substantive conversation about the myth of inclusive education in Nigeria. Okay, guys, join me again in our next episode of the Development Sector Series, #DevSectorSeries. If you want more of my episodes, go on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, #DevSectorSeries. You will see all my episodes lifted up. My favorite platform on that is YouTube. Once you go #DevSectorSeries, all the episodes since 2020 will show up on your screen. Again, thank you so much for watching, and let us change the world together. See you next week. Take care.